Hello and welcome to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May. And today, here we are on land that is held down, cared for, loved and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We are having this conversation on the Haldimand Tract. And I want to offer a reflection today, starting with one of the most important things that I think I've learned from Indigenous community members who I've been blessed to work with, and connecting it to the beginning of February, which, for folks that don't know, is Black History Month. And my starting point is this. I actually think that there are a lot of lessons that we can learn across movements from folks who have challenged political systems to do better. And Indigenous community members in our community right here in Waterloo Region, across the province of Ontario and across the country, have done a lot of work to try and make people that are responsible for building legislation and policies and that political space, to make sure that they don't forget them, that they don't remain invisible in those narratives. And I think for Black community members, as we walk into Black History Month in Canada, knowing that in the federal government in the United States, with a new administration, one of the decisions was to no longer celebrate Black history, I think it's important for us to pay attention to what we can learn from other kinds of leadership movements. And one of the things that I do think is really critical for us to understand with Indigenous sovereignty movements is that community is always centered and community always comes first. And if community always comes first, then that means that when you send an elected official into a traditional system of power and privilege like politics, that the expectation is that they too will do their work holding community at the center. And so with that, I want to make sure that I introduce you to one of my favorite people in the world, Matt Green. Matthew Green is the Member of Parliament in Hamilton Centre, and so he will be joining me today. And one of the things that I've asked him to talk to me about is what I'm calling the Black Agenda. And that agenda is actually based on a number of things, and I'll make sure that we get into each and every one of them right after this break.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Unbelievable! You never see that. What a shot! Scores!
The OHL on Rogers TV.
Guelph, the Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about Guelph and what's happening in the Royal City.
Today, I helped a senior find transportation to an important medical appointment.
Today, I helped a new mom find virtual programming so she didn't feel so isolated.
Today, I helped someone understand new government supports.
Every day, 211 navigators connect Canadians to critical government and community programs and services.
211. Help starts here.
Where will you win?
The opening tip. We're under the hit. Is Vince. What a vicious slap! Canada, the NBA title is yours.
As we welcome a new era, where will you hear the story?
Right to the rim with a slam dunk.
Catch the highlights. Dive into tapes.
It spins.
Where will you be when? Right here. Raptors basketball. Nothing but Sportsnet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back. I am so excited to introduce you to my brother, very, very good friend, Matthew Green, who is the Member of Parliament in Hamilton Centre. Matt, how are you?
I am super excited to be here. I have to say it has been way too long, my sister. I love the show. I love everything you're doing about everyday politics. And I'm just honored to be your guest today.
Oh my goodness, Matt. So listen, you are actually particularly special because you get to start off our conversation on everyday politics about Black History Month. And so what I wanted to do was kind of a casual conversation, but I may in fact have a little bit of an ulterior motive, as you can only imagine. You have a plethora of experiences in government at different levels. And part of the show, I have been trying to introduce my audience to the ways in which these different levels of government actually interact. But now here we are, and it's Black History Month. And we have a pending election coming federally. We have an election called in Ontario. And I want us to actually use February to talk about what I'm calling the Black agenda. I don't know what it is, though, and that's where my first question is. So based on your experience in government and all of the kind of work that you've done sort of inside, outside, because you're an amazing organizer in Hamilton and across the province, and I would argue the country, what can we talk about? Like, I want us to talk about what this Black agenda is. What is the role of that agenda, both inside the government and outside in community?
Well, let's start there. Let's talk about, for the last 10 years or so, I've been working here in Hamilton Centre, and the sole purpose have been to connect people to the process of government. It started off at City Council, being somebody in the community. I would watch problems that were unfolding in my neighborhoods and decisions that were made by people who did not live here and I don't feel had our best interests at heart. And so what I embarked on was kind of a journey to understand how political power works.
Yeah.
I would say that for people watching, even though it's Black History Month, I want to frame the Black agenda as an example of the way in which all marginalized communities can actually engage in the conversation of political power. Yeah. Because for so many people, I'm sure your viewers watching, everyday people in Kitchener, here in Hamilton, across the country, they just don't see themselves reflected in politics. They don't necessarily see their values reflected there either. And so really, they're only ever approached at election time for, support, for votes, for lawn signs, for volunteering, and often is the case for money. And it still leaves us on the outside of decision-making processes. So I would begin with any conversation around a Black agenda or any agenda for people who feel politically estranged from processes to begin with a real conversation around the concept of power. Who holds it?
Yep.
What decisions are they making? And who does it impact the most? And from that space, my philosophy is always to center the people most impacted by it, and I certainly know that to be your politics.
Yeah.
And in doing so, help people discover where organizing within their own communities, door to door, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, engaging on the issues that matter to them, help them, in fact, reclaim their civic power, not just at election time, but for all of the crises that tend to happen in between.
Yeah, you know what? So it's such an important conversation around where power lies. Like, I spent a lot of time when I was in provincial parliament trying to get folks to understand that they actually hold the power, right? Like, in communities where the power is held. But because we don't understand how the system operates, you don't know how to mobilize it, right?
That's right.
And so
by design.
By design, which is like louder for the people in the back. It's interesting too, because sometimes what I found is that the conversation begins and ends with representation. So you get one or two Black folks into these elected places, and then we think the job is done, right? So let's take a second and talk about that, because I know for me, part of my story is being the first Black person elected either provincially or federally in Waterloo Region, right? In your story with you going into Parliament, I remember when you were organizing people signing on to like doing anti-racist work or something like that at that level. So representation is really, really important, but I also feel like there's some gaps in the way that we understand representation. So let's talk about that. When you were in there and you were actually representing us, what did that look like? What kinds of change were you making sort of behind the scenes?
Well, let's pick up where you just left off. It's the idea, which I would frame as a type of liberal identity politic that is super individualistic. So in other words, they could point to me and say, look, you know, after 170 plus years, Matthew Green became the first, city councillor of African Canadian descent, and therefore there's no more anti-Black racism. Or it could point to you and say, look, Laura May Lindu ascended, pulled herself up by her bootstraps and is now sitting at the table, therefore there's no anti-Black racism in Kitchener. And we know these things to be false. In fact, I would argue that the small L liberal conception of identity politics, which is super individualistic and by design ignores the structural barriers that everybody else faces, uses us in our representative ways, and whether we're liberal, conservative, New Democrat, Green Party, this is true across all parties, in order to therefore negate the very real structural issues that our communities continue to face. And I say communities plural, because as you know, the Black community is super diverse. And even within our own identities, we're more than just Black people in these spaces. We're all these other things. And I challenge that, because for me, if we're not dealing with a politic and a political power that actually talks about the structural barriers, then we're not really doing anti-racism work. What we're doing is a form of inclusion that looks like, oh, well, we have a Black chief of police, or we have a Black mayor or a Black CEO, but yet the structural inequality still exists for everybody else. And so for me, anti-racism work looks like affordable housing, looks like unionization of jobs and good work with benefits and pensions, looks like world-class healthcare and education. So incidentally, and I think why your framing around a Black agenda is important for viewers who are not Black, is that when the Black community starts to organize around these issues, we're not just making it better for Black folks, we're striving to make it better for everybody. Because when we dismantle these structural systems, it's certainly not just Black people who benefit, it is everybody. So the Black agenda is a pro-worker agenda, it is a pro-affordability agenda, it is a pro-good jobs agenda, and healthcare and housing and all those things.
Again, so important, because I reflect back on when I was elected and I was the chair of the Black Caucus, for instance. Part of our job was literally to look at every single piece of legislation as it came across our desks in the chamber, and to think about how it could be better, how it was going to impact Black communities, what our experiences were, so we could include those into those debates. And without sort of concerted, intentional attention to the impact of those pieces of legislation on Black communities, I found that the conversation would never arise. And so sometimes people were frustrated that we were, like, every single thing we were talking, well, what about Black people with this education bill? What about Black people with this, internet bill in the rural areas, as though Black folks don't actually exist in those areas. And so even though there were tensions with the kinds of conversations we had, it was a bigger, our agenda was a bigger agenda. It was literally making the world a better place,
Always. And I'll say this emphatically, the provincial legislature, the Ontario legislature, was better for having you in it and is worse off with you out there. And that's not to say that there aren't other, strong Black voices in the legislature as it stands today. But the truth is that even if we're there in a representative way, if we're not bringing this type of analysis that challenges structures, if we're only there to be present at ceremonies or events or cultural opportunities, then we're really not serving the interests of our communities. And again, I can't state enough after all of this, 15, 20 years of this anti-racism work, that I know it to be true that even when we are focused on what we call the Black communities or the Black agenda, that work will always impact and improve the lives of everybody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that's part of why I know from the provincial space, there have been so many calls, even and municipal spaces as well, to disaggregate data. So when we were doing like the point in time counts and we were trying to figure out who is it that's living unhoused, that's struggling to find affordable and supportive housing, disaggregate the data, because what you'll find is the places where Black community members are, and the places that we are fighting to make better, we are surrounded by others that are experiencing similar kinds of crises. Like capitalism out of control means that a lot of us are struggling right now. But as we organize within this Black agenda, we're not saying only Black people should be okay because of this, right? The idea is make sure that there's supportive housing that actually tends to the different diverse needs of people around us. Make sure that when we're talking about education, that we're setting up classrooms to make sure every student thrives and that every education worker has what they need. Can I ask you a question? I wish I had written down more proper information, but adulting is hard.
We're family. We can do this.
So hard. We can do this?
Okay.
Whew. Go back to when you were getting folks to sign on to this anti-racist, I don't remember exactly what it was. Was it like, because I know it was bipartisan, so every single person in the legislature that you were talking to, they were talking about doing anti-racist work like in a real way, and they had signed on to something. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it was, like what that organizing was?
Yeah, if it's in reference to the work we were doing with the Parliamentary Black Caucus, it was in response to the Movement for Black Lives, the BLM movement.
Yeah.
And it was to actually address the things that you spoke about, which is desegregating data, making sure that we have a clear picture of where anti-Black racism exists in all of its pernicious ways, institutionally, through law enforcement, through our public sector in terms of differential treatment. We know for instance, the Black public sector workers are engaged right now in a Black class action lawsuit because even by the government's own account, there is deep prejudice against Black people within the public service, and they're just fighting to get the kind of equity that they deserve there. And this was a call across all levels of government to take the information that they have. Mm-hmm. This was not to impose an ideology or a result on it, but it was to take what we know through our qualitative experiences and quantify it. Because if it doesn't get measured, then it gives institutions and levels of government the opportunity, first, to deny it exists, second, to minimize it, third, to say it's our fault, right, as individuals. And having folks look at the issues in a sober way, based on the facts, makes it very difficult. So when you look at instances like police brutality, for instance, which is an issue I've been on for quite some time, the fact that they refuse to acknowledge, whether it's municipal police or provincial OPP or the RCMP, refuse to acknowledge in a desegregated way the ways in which police brutality disproportionately impact Black and Indigenous people. Right? I believe that if they actually had to show their work and to have that open transparency, that's the only way we can get accountability. Imagine if the people of Kitchener, for instance, were privy every year to legal settlements, civil settlements by police malfeasance. Now, I know that that's not a popular topic in a time when people are feeling deeply unsafe, but we also know that when you don't improve the material conditions for people, when you leave people priced out in a form of economic violence out of the housing market, and you have people living in tents, when you don't provide mental health care or you don't provide psychological supports, people will sometimes turn to drug use in ways to cope and self-medicate. So these social pressures that people are seeing across the country are symptoms to a capitalistic economy that seeks to profit off of every single aspect of our life, rather than supporting the social good and distributing the economy and prosperity across all people rather than concentrating it in the 87 families who have more wealth than half of the country.
Yeah.
Like, that's the dire situation we're in. And these are the things that we need to unpack. And yeah, that campaign was just one amongst many.
Yeah.
And what we're starting to find as the information comes back is, oh gosh, turns out what Black folks were saying is actually quantifiably true. People are being murdered at higher rates. They are being incarcerated at higher rates. They are being given differential care in healthcare. They are being targeted in education in terms of expulsions. These are just the facts. And until we are ready to come to grips with that reality, we won't be able to truly have a democratic and equitable society in Canada.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want us to actually pick up on this notion of the data, because what I've also found interesting is what data gets made public and which does not. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be right back to carry on our conversation about the Black agenda. We will be right back.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers. We'll see you this Monday.
Hey, Chef D here. Join me Saturdays at 4:30 for At Home with Chef D, season number 10. Thanks so much for that. Hey, we're going to go back old school. We're going to join Julia Child and Graham Kerr and some of their great recipes and share some of their passion with you. At Home with Chef D, Saturdays at 4:30. Won't you join me?
Cooking with Chef D.
It's closing time, and you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive, and the buses have stopped running. You could always call your girlfriend. Or maybe your roommate? What about your best friend? You could just dial 1-888-TAXI-GUY or use the Taxi Guy app. The call and the app are free, and they both connect you to a local cab company to bring you home safely. Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive, drive sober.
As Ontario heads to the polls, Rogers TV brings you coverage of the candidates running to be your Queen's Park representative. Tune in for the local campaign as this election's most important local issues are addressed.
I really want to hear from my candidates this time. There's so much on the line.
And on election night, watch the local results. Coverage focused on the numbers from your local ridings. Make Rogers TV your election destination.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. So, Matt, I want to pick up on something that we left off of. We were talking about data collection, disaggregating the data so that we know like what is actually happening. But I've been noticing, and I remember this when I was elected, every city put out an article saying there was a rise in hate crimes. So we saw like this huge increase of hate crimes across the country. We could see where where the targeting was happening. And if even like more recently, we're seeing those mass deportation now signs. I know there was something like that in Hamilton. We had something just last weekend in Kitchener as well, where folks were standing up there, masked, of course, but with these mass deportation signs. So we know that immigrants, for instance, and newcomers are being targeted. But then when I look inside the House and I look inside the system, it's like the legislation isn't matching the data that they're putting out. So in Ontario, for instance, and for the viewers, I will make sure to connect you to some of these grants that they announced. But there was an announcement in Ontario that they were going to put $10 million, I think it was, for that was the government of Canada. $10 million in the Canadian government. Federally, they're going to put this towards these kinds of programs to try and address this within community. In Ontario, they said $1.7 million was going to be put towards stopping hate-motivated crimes across the province. But when you dig deeper, those grants are for community organizations. I know in Ontario you had to partner with the police to be able to access some of this funding, but it doesn't seem to match the data that is coming out, because hate crimes are still, the bar is super high, and it's near impossible to prove to somebody that what actually happened was a hate crime. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit from your vantage point about that disconnect. And for us as Black voters, what is it that we can be asking for from those that are running to represent us at all of these different levels to try and fix and close that gap?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would challenge the narrative that there's been a spike in hate crimes.
Okay.
I would argue that hate crimes have always been present in Canada, they just haven't been reported. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, when you speak about the Black agenda and people think it's just about the Black community, it's not. Part of the Black Lives Matter movement demanded, part of the activism that came out of this movement demanded for this information and for a response. The problem is, law enforcement, as we see it now, is completely culturally ill-equipped to be able to determine the veracity of hate crimes. I think they are vastly underreported, and I think that they are skewed in their statistics about which communities have their quote-unquote offenses attacked more. You know, we're in a moment right now where there's an intentional ambiguity around a rise in a neo-Nazi culture. Yeah. We've seen this with Elon Musk in the Sikh Hill. People are equivocating about what this means and is it really true and does he really mean it? And we're seeing now with this recent priest an emulation of this. So when we talk about these mass people who are standing on corners with this deportation now, you know, what is the clear law around somebody throwing up Nazi salutes in downtown Hamilton or Kitchener or St. Albert in Alberta? Mm-hmm. And the truth is, we do not have within existing law the thresholds that you mentioned that provide that moral clarity. I would argue what we need is a trained legal prosecution department within provincial Solicitor General's offices, Ministries of Justice, and within the Federal Attorney General's office in the Ministry of Justice there, so that trained lawyers who understand the law, the thresholds, the case law around it, rather than some detective who comes to their policing with very limited cultural competencies in their training and very limited understandings of what is a hate crime. I know of instances here where people were attacked repeatedly, being called the N-word, being threatened with sexual violence, and it was brushed off. So there's a big differential of reporting and investigation, and most specifically in prosecution around it, which generally leaves a feeling for many communities, not just Black communities, Muslim communities, trans communities, LGBTQ, all newcomer communities, women through domestic violence, where these issues are not being taken seriously. And I think the important point that you raised here is that there needs to be accountability on the outcomes of legislation. So what we need to be doing is not just saying we got to throw more money at cops and do more training or whatever. We need to take a look at what the data says, and then what's the outcome of the data. How many reported crimes, how many investigations, how many prosecutions, how many charges. Right? Like how many are successful. And then I think, you know, when there's that kind of accountability, then people who are right now in this moment very comfortable of doing neo-Nazi stuff understand that society will reject that and the full letter of the law will be brought down upon them.
I hear you, because on the one hand, I can understand when we say ensure that we invest in the community organizations that are holding the folks that are experiencing harm when hate crimes are reported. I get that. But I also I also believe that when we advocate for that kind of holding a community with care, that we don't think that that's the end all solution, that multiple things have to happen at the same time. And one of those things is to ensure that it doesn't then become the responsibility of, let's say, the Jewish community when there's anti-Semitism to fix that problem, or Black communities when there's anti-Blackness to fix that problem, or anti-Palestinian racism when that arises, for the Palestinian community has to now be the one to fix it. And I worry that the sort of like the coded language that happens from the government because of the way that power is operationed, that when they give you the money, they're also handing you the responsibility. They are divesting themselves of the responsibility and the work. Have you seen, or can you speak a little bit more about this idea? I like talking things into being. I like that idea of having lawyers in legislative, nonpartisan roles that are looking at these pieces of legislation and these experiences and sort of helping us to do that work. Because what I also know is that people that run for election to represent you don't have all the skills in the world in all of these areas. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm overseeing legislation. So let's imagine that. What would that actually look like if we could create something that would help us to address the ongoing ebb and flow of hate crimes in community?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a step back and I'm gonna be very clear with the viewers. Hate crimes are a system of white supremacy.
Yeah.
Fascism that is reappearing in very clear ways, unambiguously. It's not a Elon Musk salute. That is a Sikh hail. That is a neo-Nazi salute. That impacts all the communities that you listed. And what we need is a societal response that makes being a neo-Nazi in this country, beyond these American conceptions of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. In Canada, those are reasonably limited.
Yeah.
So that when you are embarking on an activity or an expression that is rooted in the elimination of entire races of people, that in and of itself is a form of violence that needs to be dealt with as such.
Yeah.
So, it's not just about helping legislatures. It's actually about having within the body of law people who are equipped to identify and engage it and prosecute it. There has to be a deterrence on this.
Yeah.
If we begin to normalize fascism in Canada, we're going to see the exact same results that we're seeing in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Fascism is on our doorsteps. Anybody who's not alive to that right now needs to wake up and pay attention. For the vast majority of Canadians who are feeling this discomfort of Trump and what they're seeing with Musk and the AfD in Germany and the fascist factions that are organizing in Italy and all across the West, we need to take note. Right, and I do think this is a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah.
I do not believe that all people who identify as conservative are permissive of this type of behavior.
Yeah.
But there are within the far right factions who will allow this fascist discourse to take place because it might serve some of their other ideological purposes, whether it's a Christo-nationalism or whether it's a kind of deep male misogyny, or whether it's just rooted in a basic form of white supremacy. So we need to uproot these things, and we need to be very vigilant against it. And I think most important for your viewers watching, we cannot and must not take the basic democratic principles of this country for granted, including the very deep commitment we have in Canada to multiculturalism.
Yeah.
We can't allow ethno-nationalism to take hold in Canada. That is counter to Canadian values, and I'm saying that in a nonpartisan way.
Yeah.
I would hope that all Canadians, regardless of how they view this country, would see themselves in a settler colonial setting as being immigrants in some way, shape, or form, unless they're First Nations or anyway. And I think that's what's before us. And it is, if you hear urgency in my voice, in Hamilton, we've been the canary in the coal mine. We've been fighting this faction of far right, Proud Boys, Soldiers of Odin, the Canadian Nationalist Party. We've seen it here, and we know the kind of harm that it can cause.
Yeah, Matt, we're going to take a break, but I want to pick up on that. And the other sort of background idea that I have about this show is I want to be able to provide the viewers with concrete steps that they can take to be part of the change that we're talking about. And so we'll take a quick break, but when we come back, I want us to talk about the kinds of questions that we can ask the politicians that are going to be knocking on our doors or are knocking on our doors as we speak, to find out what their commitment is to doing this work. Because sometimes I find the political agenda and what we ask of our politicians, we separate these kinds of questions out. We'll ask them for their housing strategy, we'll ask them for, a healthcare strategy, a mental health strategy, but we aren't going to ask them about how they plan on addressing the rise of, or the appearance of, in such an overt way, fascist rhetoric that's happening in all of our communities. So we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Unbelievable. You just never see that. What a shot.
The OHL on Rogers TV.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
This is a brain in urgent need of mental health care. But because 3 out of every 4 Indigenous people experience racism in healthcare, she may not get the help she needs. Become an ally. Rise above racism in healthcare.
Guelph, the Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about Guelph and what's happening in the Royal City.
Sundays for Pairs is a service that we believe will help you discover more of God's promises and purpose for your life. A reminder that God is for you. Courtesy of Pairs Community Church. Join us every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. on Rogers TV to be encouraged and pointed towards hope.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. Okay, so Matt, now it's time for us to get real practical, because as this conversation is happening, politicians are out across Ontario knocking on doors, talking about either being elected for the first time, getting reelected, etc. And one of the worries that I have is that oftentimes we as the public separate out the issues that we think politicians should be talking about from the issues that we are talking about. And I'm convinced that what you and I have been discussing today is literally at the root of the social problems that we're talking about in all these other areas. So, with that as the backdrop, what kinds of questions do you think we can be asking the politicians that are knocking on our doors in this upcoming election in Ontario and the federal election when that officially gets called?
Yeah, I would say that this election cycle is very much about the economy and the economic uncertainty for people. Income inequality continues to grow, wages stay stagnant, people are falling behind. That is a fact. When they fall behind, they feel very isolated. So to the viewers who are watching, the first question I would ask anybody knocking on my door is, what is your plan to improve the economic and material conditions of my neighbors in my neighborhood? For example, how are you going to improve our quality of life? And if their answer is a tax cut or cutting government or what have you and so forth, they've lost the plot. There needs to be an economy that is planned for everyday people, not planned for Bay Street. And so you have to ask that question. The second question I love to ask politicians, because elections are values conversations, is I would ask them, what issue do you care about so much that if your party wanted you to vote against it, you'd be willing to step away and take whatever consequences come your way? What is your red line, in other words? And if somebody doesn't have a moral red line in politics, they are compromised, and they would be willing to do whatever it is their party or their leadership tell them to do. And earlier in the segment, you talked about the way in which community, needs to push the political class in a direction. And even in framing this question, I would say you're right. There actually isn't a lot of leadership in politics. Political parties and political actors in elections are more like thermometers. What the public needs to be is the thermostat. We need to set the temperature. We need to raise the heat up on the issues that matter to us. And we need to recognize the person on the other side of the door needs to be taking that information back to their party so that their party can be guided by what the public truly wants and not what some focus group or some internal political bubble says.
That second question is like literally brilliant, because so one of the things that people used to always ask me about when I was elected, so not when I was at the doors. And when I was at the doors, the questions were always the same kinds of questions. But when I was elected, they would ask me, how is it that I am acting differently in the party compared to the other people that are also elected in the same party? What is it about the way that I'm approaching sort of making real the political agenda that the party was standing behind or professing to support? And why is it that more people sort of don't act that way? And I'm convinced that part of it is like the culture and climate, how we've normalized the role or the job of politicians. I think sometimes when we say very easily and casually, politicians always lie, then we're forgetting that part of your second question. What is it that would make you walk away if the party decided to do that? The other thing that I think you're raising that I just want to emphasize is that no matter what platform a party puts forward, and it does not matter which party or what the platform is, what you're asking for in an election is an individual to actualize it. And so there are particular skill sets, right, that the individuals that you are electing need to have to be able to put that into the real world. And so if that's the case, and let's say you're going out on the doors, or like let's imagine when you're going out on the doors and you're running around in Hamilton Center and you're talking to folks about hate crimes and the data that they've seen, right? What kinds of questions do you think people could formulate for you that would let you express how you would approach that? Because I feel like I can ask you a question, you understand it, and so it would be a different kind of thing. But what do we do for the politicians that we've also pointed to that don't necessarily understand what's going on? What questions and what kind of push can the public put forward to get folks to literally engage in addressing hate in our communities or connecting that to the political agenda?
So the answer I have might not be the one that you're looking for, but I'm going to say it anyways, because it is my feeling, it is my position that by the time somebody's at your doors, it's probably too late to really change the narrative. That true political power is built in communities, door to door, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, between elections, building constituency, building public will around an idea. Remember, I talked about the thermometer versus the thermostat. So while we're in a snap election and while we have a federal election coming up, I think if people want to get insight into how political parties work, show up at a campaign office proactively. Walk in with the idea that you might engage and volunteer on electoralism, but with a commitment to stay after it's done. Because policies, platforms, as you know, campaign manifestos are crafted at conventions and through leadership races, and they're values conversations. And it is almost impossible to unpack a values conversation in a 5-minute exchange on a doorstep.
Yeah.
So when people come to the door, you know, you can put to them, what have they done to meaningfully engage the community? Or you could ask them the simple question that I like to ask is like, name 3 things that you've led in our neighborhoods and in our communities to make this a better place.
Yep.
And if the answer is they haven't committed to that leadership prior to putting their name on a ballot, then they're not really authentically engaging in local leadership.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because our system was designed to send local leadership to parliaments. And what we've become is a political class that is so concentrated on party loyalty, fealty, dare I say, that the expectation is that every single person who's elected, their job is to now do the party line to the people rather than the people to the party line. So that's the distinction I make. It's not one that says that people should give up now. No, engage. But let's stay committed after this is done.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny because what I wrote down in my notes as I was thinking through my own question. So I asked the questions to those that are watching and then I answer them in my head, and I may not like my questions either. So don't worry about it. But what I wrote down was that what really matters is in between. So for me, part of what I wish people would ask me when I knock on the door is, what have I been doing every day after I was elected all the 4 years that I was in office? What was I doing? Where was I? What kinds of examples of change? The other thing that I think is also important for folks to know is that change will look different in different communities. And so it's also, that's why that question is so important. Because depending on what's on the rise in your particular community, for instance, during the last election, literally during the election, a big encampment appeared in the core, like the downtown core in Kitchener. And people were talking about that. That wasn't necessarily linked to what the platform pieces were, what the party itself was talking about. But if you want to get a leader that understands the community, then you want that leader to be talking about the things that are popping up in your actual neighborhood. And so I do think that those questions are really, really important. When I'm going to ask you one of the questions, like when you go back, you're going to put your name forward again, and when you go back, what would be one of the first things that you would want to put your attention to when the government, the federal government, gets back to the table and starts getting back to work? What's one of the core issues that you find yourself coming back to and wanting to make change in?
Yeah, I would say it would be the direction of the economy. We have a planned economy, but it's not planned by us. It's planned by international banks and financiers and corporations. We have what liberals call the rules-based international order, but that only works when there's rational actors. You get somebody like Trump in who's going to rip up all these agreements and try to reset the agenda for cities like Hamilton, which has a vibrant, long historic legacy around steel production. That's a big problem. So the idea of them shuttering or impacting the local jobs here, we've seen that happen in Hamilton. We watched it during the first time NAFTA was introduced in the 90s. We know what happens when these jobs go south. It puts tremendous social pressure. So the first thing that I want to talk about, or the things that I'm going to continue to talk about, is having a democratic economy, one that allows everyday people and workers to be at the table as we plan it, one that distributes the prosperity to everybody and the people who actually produce the wealth in this country, which are the workers and the working class, not necessarily the people and the shareholders who are just collecting dividends and checks off the backs of the actual workers. So for me, I think given what's before us, particularly down south, it's going to be incumbent for us to have an industrial strategy, one that reinvests in Canadian manufacturing. So we're not just resource extraction, but we're also into production. We have good union jobs, sectoral bargaining, these things that help out people keep up with the pernicious impacts of what I would consider a collapsing capitalist economy.
Thank you for that. And I want to... There's a part of me that thinks that I'm being a little bit facetious, but then there's another part of me that thinks it just needs to be said. That, my friends, is the Black agenda. Like the Black agenda is everybody else's agenda. It's the exact same agenda. It's just Black people talking about it. And as a consequence, it means that we're inserting ourselves in the narrative of the country for the provincial election, inserting ourselves in the narrative of Ontario, and making sure that whatever policies, practices get normalized now, and the ones that we create now, that we're not ignored or silenced. And I think that that is so very important. And so now, Matt, I get to like my favorite part of the show. I get really excited about this. I ask everybody this because I think it is important for us to speak into being the world that we want. And so if you could snap your fingers and make one system change, what system change would that be?
Well, I would definitely have to go back to the basic necessities of life, housing. Every person in this country deserves to have dignified, deeply affordable housing, to have a roof over their head, to have access to good food at an affordable cost, to have access to world-class healthcare and education. These basic necessities of life that have been commodified by capitalism need to be recaptured by the working class and distributed and invested on in a way that would help people have the kind of dignity that they deserve in this country.
Matt, you are brilliant and amazing as always. I am so happy that we had an opportunity to hang out a little bit and chat about the Black agenda. I believe that Black History Month is a really important time, but it's most important because we're talking about real things, real change, real experiences that we have to try and make better. And so I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to come and hang out with me.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. My only regret is that I couldn't be there in person.
Next time, and I'll bake you bread. I did bake bread, so we'll get you back for sure. Folks, we will be right back after this break.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
Hey, what's up? We're Chris and Kim, host of What's Buzzin' right here on Rogers TV.
We talk about local trends, we interview local guests, and we overall just have a lot of fun.
8 p.m. Wednesday nights on Rogers TV.
Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Ferfaro reminding you to tune in every Friday night at 6:30 for This Week in Rangers Nation. I'm going to have exclusive highlights and interviews with your Rangers players. I'm going to have Rangers alumni. We're going to talk to some of the coaches, and because it's me, we're going to have a little bit of fun as well. Every Friday at 6:30, everything you want to know here in our town. It's This Week in Rangers Nation right here on Rogers TV.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges? When you need support but don't know where to turn, just dial 211. 211 connects you to the programs or services near you.
211, how can I help you?
211, help starts here.
Kitchener's perfect music mix is on Chime 96.7. So every song is someone's favorite song. On Chime 96.7.
Speed, grace, accuracy, excellence.
David cuts in, waits, tucks it home. A virtuoso.
Pure fire on ice. You know I'm here for it.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. Was that not a wonderful conversation? Do you now understand why I love Matt Green so much? He is brilliant, and he is succinct, and he is clear, and he is dedicated to community. And so I just want to say to Matt, thank you for all of the work that you do in Hamilton Centre and for the country in your role as a Member of Parliament. I want folks to remember to follow me on Instagram, if you aren't already, at everydaypolitics_. _official. I'll be sure to post any news about the new guests that are coming up, but you can also reach out to me if there's something in particular that you'd like to speak about. I will also make sure that for the viewers, I have a couple links. Some of them I spoke about already during the interview, some I didn't. So I'll make sure to connect to the Parliament in Canada, some notes that they had on the rise in hate and what the promise was from the federal government to address hate crimes. I will do the same thing for Ontario, especially right now as we are walking through an election. I think it's important for us to have a sense of what kinds of programs we want to ask of people that are coming to our doors and asking for a vote. And one of the things that I didn't get to talk about, but I think is really, really important as we start this conversation about a Black agenda, we're going to hold this through all of the guests that I have on in February to celebrate Black History Month. There is a report that came out on January 21st, which is Lincoln Alexander Day. It was led by Dr. Aaron Tooley and also held by Operation Black Vote. And it's called Black on the Ballot, Black Canadians and Electoral Politics. I'm going to make sure that there is a link to information for that report because it's interesting to think about what happens when we send people into public office that represent and reflect communities that are often not heard or spoken to or allowed to have a seat at that position of power and privilege. And so I'll make sure that you have access to that report, and I cannot wait to have each of you come back and watch next week. See you then.
Behold Emily Carr, painter, about to encounter the force that will consume her life.
How tightly they sealed their secrets from me, humble and pleading before the great trees, awaiting the invitation from the Spirit to come meet me halfway. Nothing is still now, everything is alive. At last, I knew I must see through the eye of the totem itself, the mythic eye of the forest.
Seldom able to live by her brush, before she died in 1945, Emily Carr was in the first rank of Canadian painters.
This is my country. What I want to express is here, and I love it. Amen.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
In para-hockey, the ice tilts in favor of men. But that will never stop us.
United by passion, battling for equity. We are the National Women's Para-Hockey Team of Canada.
We're here.
We're hungry.
We're ready.
Ready to inspire.
Ready to leave our legacy.
Ready to be supported and make history. It's our time. Are you ready?
Hey, Chef D here. Join me Saturdays at 4:30 for At Home with Chef D, season number 10. Thanks so much for that. Hey, we're going to go back old school. We're going to join Julia Child and Graham Kerr and some of their great recipes and share some of their passion with you. At Home with Chef D, Saturdays at 4:30. Won't you join me?
Cooking with Chef D.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers, and we're off like a herd of turtles.